and good evening to you all, wherever you are. Um, it's a privilege to reflect on the beauty of God with you all. But I'd like, at least in the very beginning of this talk, for you all to just share very briefly what comes to your mind when you hear the word beauty. But generally speaking, when we hear uh, the word beauty, when we look upon something and we say, this thing is beautiful, um, it often means there's something about this thing that attracts us, something about whatever we behold that we feel drawn to. And why do we feel drawn to it? It is because we recognize some value in it. It is value in things that we behold that draws us. That is the quality that beauty has. And notice that it is value that we recognize outside of ourselves. So it is value beyond ourselves. That is, so to speak, what it means to transcend ourselves, to see, to recognize beyond ourselves something that is valuable. This is what we experience, say, when we fall in love, or when we meet friends, or when we look out for another person's good, or when we just recognize simply and what must be done to preserve the common good. So recognizing value beyond oneself. Beauty. Beauty is a transcendental value. But to speak of something transcendent that is going beyond oneself, the optimum height one can reach when one goes outside of oneself is God's very own self. The maximum height one can reach if one was to go beyond where one is God's very own self. The maximum distance one can cover if one was to go beyond where one is God's very own self. The maximum depth we can reach if one was to go into the depths beyond where one is God's very own self. And difference also. The maximum depth one can reach if one was to go into oneself is also God's very own self. So in a nutshell, we are fully immersed, our being and our sense of valuing, our sense of reaching out to that which is valued or valuable, or that which we recognize as having value. Our sense of doing that is immersed in God, because God is the fullness of transcendence beyond ourselves. But to speak about beauty as a transcendental value, as value recognized outside of oneself, and to speak about beauty in relation to God, dear friends, is to speak about that very beauty from which our sense of going outwards springs and originates. But when we speak about the transcendental values, dear friends, there are three values we generally speak of as making up transcendental values. As far as our human cognitive capacities can identify, we speak about beauty, we speak about goodness, we speak about truth, all of which we say are true of God. God is truth. God is good. God is beauty. But the transcendence of God also allows us to recognize other values in God, because everything in God is absolute and transcends us. We say God is just. We say God is kind. We say God is one. We say God is merciful. We say God is spirit. And in the incarnation, Jesus becoming man, we say God has taken up human nature. God become man. And that gives us a pivot, something to hinge our sense of desiring the beauty beyond ourselves. But let's stay with the three essential transcendental values, which for us in our human cognitive capacity, we point to as the basic transcendental value: truth, goodness, beauty. When we look at truth, dear friends, I think it was John Rawls, the American philosopher, political philosopher, who said, truth is the first virtue of human thought. Indeed, if truth is the first virtue of human thought, then it only makes sense when the Lord inviting his people, I think it's in the book of Exodus, I think chapter 4, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and with all your mind. That's the fullness of who a person can be. With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might, and with all your being. So if truth is the first virtue of human thought, that's 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 what helps us populate our minds. That's what helps us appreciate the things that we receive, you know, the mental categories that we receive and can make sense of. And the optimum truth we can ever receive and perceive their friends as God. That is as what pertains to the mind. You should love the Lord with all your soul. Indeed, dear friends, God is spirit. We are created after the image and likeness of God. And so our spiritual sense approximates us closer to God in relation to everything else that we function by. So when we're told to love the Lord your God with all your soul, it is to ensure that our spirits are as close as possible in its resemblance to God, which it was created for. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your might, with all your might, which refers to that which we are capable of. We speak about the faculties of the human soul, the memory, the will, and the understanding, and all of these play a role in moving us to act in incarnational form, to act through our bodies. We bring about goodness by taking action. Okay? So with all your might, the first value, the first value of, of human physical nature is goodness. This is why uh, it is said in scripture, what Christ himself would taught through Peter, whatever it is that we take in, say whether it be it food or whatever, they're indeed neutral. They're neither good nor bad. They become good or bad according to how we use them. It's the same thing even with the way we use our bodies. To the extent that we can bring about the goodness by which we resemble God, who is spirit. So goodness at the service of the spiritual. But also that invitation the Lord gives to his people began with saying you should love the Lord your God with all your heart. My dear friends, your heart is the domain of beauty. It is with the heart that we recognize beauty. Indeed, beauty is the first value of the human heart. It prepares us for appreciating more and more our resemblance to God in resplendent. So, there we have all of these. Speaking of God, as of course we tend to think of ourselves as rational beings, and that seems to be like the key thing by which we say we kind of like are superior to other living beings. The intellect as rational beings. Well, true. But also the spiritual, of course, all of this connected to the spiritual. To whatever extent that every other living being might have whatever faculties that we have. The ultimate difference is in our faculties all being integrated and at the service, all meeting together and in the domain of the spiritual. Serve the Lord your God with all your soul. So they meet together in that place. The beauty is spoken of again by another philosopher, Max Pickett, as the splendor surrounding truth. It's just a quotation from Max Pickett I would like to read. He once said, "There is radiance surrounding truth, and this radiance is a sign that truth has an impulse to expand in all directions. The radiance surrounding truth is beauty. In this way, truth is able to penetrate far and wide. The radiance of beauty prepares the way for truth." This was said by a philosopher. It may not necessarily be something we would identify as, spiritual, but it has spiritual relevance. Because just as we can say that beauty prepares the way for truth, so we can say that of any of the transcendental values. Goodness prepares the way for truth and for beauty. Beauty and goodness prepares the way for truth. And then truth and goodness prepares the way for beauty. But our focus is on beauty. So when we speak about beauty and how truth prepares and goodness prepares the way for beauty, I just like to use the example of just a simple example of a flower, which generally, I would say, in general terms, we as human beings tend to recognize as beauty, beauty in nature. A flower. We see a flower from afar and it looks beautiful. We feel drawn to it. We move towards it. Sometimes we try to go to say we want to pluck that flower. Okay. But then you approach, you get close, and you discover, oh, this is not a natural flower. This was fabricated. It is made out of plastic. There's something within you that could make you feel disappointed, and you might lose interest. The splendor surrounding beauty, truth. So because we recognize this is not as true as we initially hoped and appreciated. It's the same thing. It's like saying, oh, you find a lawn, that is fully green, covered in green, lovely, grass. And the feeling is different when, say, from afar, you see a lawn. Yeah, it looks green, it looks natural. And you approach it and you find, oh, it's just some carpet that was put there. It's a different feeling. Huh? There's something of that initial attraction you have that is lost upon recognizing that that is not as true. That gives you an idea of the type of radiance that we say that surrounds beauty, the radiance of truth. Indeed, it is also the radiance of goodness. But you see, we have spoken about these transcendental values, beauty, truth, goodness, and attached to them to one of, the areas that, at least one of the areas that we spoke about in God's invitation to his people. I think that's in Exodus 4 or 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one Lord, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, with all your might, and with all your mind. These words which I command you this day shall be upon your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit by the way, when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise, which means at all times, whether you're relaxing at home, whether you're walking outside, whether you're doing work, whether you're at rest, all of these values should inform your sense of consciousness, your sense of appreciation of value. The heart, the domain of beauty. Serve the Lord your God with all your might, which pertains to our bodily capacity. Indeed, not only bodily, but bodily capacity as it can be influenced by, the faculties of the soul. Yeah. The domain of goodness, the body. The soul, sorry, the mind, the domain of truth. And then it said, you should love the Lord your God with all your soul. And we say that these three domains all tie into the soul, which is the domain of the spiritual. God is spirit. We are made in the image and likeness of God. It only makes sense that our resemblance to God ultimately has to be in the spiritual sense. And the spiritual sense has all these three transcendental, these three domains of the transcendental values in us, all integrated in it. And yet, that integration says something about the beauty of God. And I say this just really relying on what I have extracted as the understanding of beauty that yet another philosopher in the person of Simone Weil, she was a Jewish French philosopher in the early 20th century. Her name was Simone Weil. And her conception of beauty is that beauty is the harmony of dissimilar things, of things that are not similar. And I'll say this is true. Speaking of these, capacities, these capacities that we have, different as they are and representing the domain of one of the three transcendental values, yet they blend together in a seamless fashion. Think about how you can put, let me just use something very domestic and simple. You can put a table and a chair and say a mat and a pillow all together in one place. They're different things and yet they harmonize. Or say a plate and you have a knife and a fork and a cup and a jug of water and food in the plate. All different things, but they come together, serving one common purpose. They harmonize. That is beauty. This is the type of beauty that these three domains of the transcendental values inherent in each of us, you know, that's the type of beauty that they achieve in the domain of the spiritual, where we serve the Lord our God with all our soul. And this only leads us to consider what best allows us attain our optimum potential in the spiritual. And here I'd just like to read two very useful quotations from the Carmelite saint, whom some of you may have heard of, some may not have heard of, in the person of St. John of the Cross. In his writing The Ascent of Mount Carmel, um, book 1, chapter 4, number 4, he says, all the beauty of creatures compared to the infinite beauty of God is the height of ugliness. As Solomon says in Proverbs, comeliness is deceiving and beauty vain. So a person attached to the beauty of any creature is extremely ugly in God's sight. A soul is unsightly, a soul so unsightly is incapable of transformation into the beauty that is God, because ugliness does not attain to beauty. My dear friends, I know this might sound a bit harsh, in the way, in what it is saying, because it is saying a person who is attached to the beauty of any creature is extremely ugly. Perhaps we would ask ourselves the question, though, then what's the basis for which we say, oh, we fall in love with people that we find attractive, that we feel drawn to, we, you know, we more or less love things that we feel, attracted and drawn to, call to be around. No, but that's not what is being proposed here. It's simply saying that the beauty that we recognize in people and in things, insofar as they are recognized as created things and beings, that those beauties that we recognize, they are beauty to be appreciated in such a way that they foster our transformation towards God. In other words, they bring about an improvement of our resemblance to God. And that which mitigates against our resemblance to God is attachment. So let me read something else from St. John of the Cross. And this concerns attachments. Inordinate appetites for the things of the world do all this damage to the beauty of the soul and even more. So great is the harm that if we try to express how ugly and dirty is the imprint the appetites leave on the soul, we find nothing comparable to it. My dear friends, ultimately, as far as we are created after the image and likeness of God, we have a capacity for God, and therefore we have a capacity for beauty. So being attracted to things and to people is not the issue. It is being attracted in such a way that allows, that in such a way that liberates us, that makes us free for God. And so, dear friends, this is truly indeed the litmus test for anything that we feel drawn to or that we feel pulled towards, for any person that we feel drawn to. Sometimes we say, yes, we really love this person, and it's true, yes. Say love covers a multitude of sins and things. Yeah, we get that. But would say, in the case of a person that you really love, will the person's sinning influence you to sin as well? See, that's a problem, no? So if the person's sinning would not corrupt you, oh, beauty is achieving its purpose. The person's sinning rather leads you to God, and open yourself more to God and ask God, who is the fullness of beauty, to come in and make beautiful this soul you feel drawn to. See, that has disposed you much better for God. Name anything that we feel attracted to, anything that we find as beautiful. Does it enslave us and steal our freedom in God and for God from us? Or does it open us all the more towards God in appreciation of the good, the privilege that God has granted us to behold this thing and to feel this thing? Dear friends, at the end of the day, in summary, what we are saying is that the beauty of God, which transcends our full comprehension, is appreciated by us because that beauty is contagious. And without having that sense of holding on to the beauty of God, which is liberating, I fear that the imperfections of our desires only increases the distance between ourselves and God's beauty. So let us try, dear friends, today to be better disposed for God's beauty and to be at the service of that beauty and to keep ourselves free from unhealthy attachments. I think I'll leave it at that. And thank you all for having me.